now that the draft that was resent today from me, we will review those over that draft over the next couple of weeks, and I would like everybody's comments emailed to me by the 17th of June. So that gives you about 2.5 weeks to do a review and put comments on that, and then I'll compile them and get the information over to our consultants. With that, one other thing, if the members of the steering committee would help me out and keep track of your hours, your time associated with working on the tree ordinance. I've been tracking for the meetings and the tours and stuff related to who's attended the meetings. However, time at home, studying the draft, commenting, if you would track that time and turn that into me as well, that all counts towards our in-kind match for this grant. So it's very important to track the time outside of the meetings for everyone. So I'd appreciate your help on that. So with that, Joe, if you are ready to take it away, please do.
Yes, ma'am, I am indeed ready. How's everybody doing? This is Joe Joyner, your Data Resource Group consultant for this project. I appreciate everybody's time and making it. And it seems like February, maybe February, January was when we last met, and that seems like a long, long, long time ago. So we're in a different world, but I'm glad that we could all make it here today to discuss the ordinance update. So just quick little agenda, just a rough outline of what I'd like to go over today regarding the draft. So just do a status update, sort of where we are now, and then look backwards and say, like, how did we get here? And go over the last couple months. My objective is to provide you with an understanding of the big picture and the concepts that I incorporated in using the draft. There are a lot of details in here, and there's definitely more information than 1 hour can cover, but I'm hoping that in this hour, you're able to understand my way of thinking and my train of thought, which led to the development of the new ordinance. And for those of you, the new draft, and for those of you who have had an opportunity to look through the draft, and I saw Nick already had an opportunity not only to look through the draft and also make detailed comments, which I appreciate. And thank you for that. And so the draft looks very different from the current ordinance. And there's many reasons for that. We'll get into those. But so there's a lot has gone into this. And so hopefully at the end of this, you'll understand why we made the changes that we did. You may or may not agree with the changes, but I hope to provide you with the understanding of why we incorporated them. Sorry, I'm working with 2 screens here. I gotta move some things out of the way so I can review my notes while I'm presenting. There we go. So just wanted to go over the project team again and make sure, because things have changed. I think Tiffany, if I believe Shelly Tiffany is a new member of the team, and Melissa is still there. And then I believe the steering committee hasn't changed, and neither has our team. So throwing that up there for y'all's recap. And so we were tasked ultimately with reviewing, evaluating, and updating the draft. So the review and evaluation period has been done, and we are currently in the updating period. So I intend to provide you with context for the draft. So what we heard, observed, read, and ultimately concluded during the research and review period. The research and review period included 3 or 4 phone meetings, 2 on-site meetings, One of those was extensive with many stakeholder meetings and in-field site visits. Now, there was document research of existing construction documents. There was consultation with officials in other municipalities on what does and does not work with their ordinances. So a lot of prep has gone into this, and I think ultimately what we have, I'm excited about it, and I think it's some aspects of it are on the novel side. I have not reviewed all the ordinances in all the country, but I don't think that there's an ordinance like this that exists in North Carolina. And part of the reason for that is Belmont is such a unique city. You're the only city on a peninsula. You have a lot of constrictions when it comes to land development. So as such, that's going to dictate a unique ordinance. So the quick update on the timeline. Looks like we are right. Where's my cursor? Uh-oh. There we go. So we are right around here, the second draft review period. Moving forward, as Shelley mentioned, June 17th, I believe, is when comments are due to her, and later that week, she'll provide them up to me, and then Shelley and I will get together and discuss when works for the city on the next round of meetings. So more draft review and tweaking, and be happy to, well, I'm looking forward for your questions and comments, because I feel confident with the direction that the ordinance has gone in terms of the concept and conceptualizing what Belmont needs, and now tweaking it to fit specific needs, which would be difficult for me as a consultant to identify, not living in Belmont and not having the intimate knowledge that you all have of the area. So you'll be able to hopefully work within the conceptual framework put together and let me know where there might be loopholes, weaknesses, or specific circumstances unique to Belmont that could require some change in the language. And so this is just a duplicate, intentional duplicate of a slide from earlier in the from the presentation, I think in the initial kickoff meeting, because I just wanted to quickly the fundamental reasons why we're performing the ordinance update. Essentially, the ordinance is a powerful tool for managing your community forest and for shaping the way in which the view shed of your city will look over the years. And so ordinances require routine maintenance, and that maintenance involves an assessment of your community's needs, your goals, and your desired development outcomes. So what we heard, and just big picture, very broad strokes, these are 4 things that we heard repeatedly from all from the city and the planning department in our initial phone calls through our initial steering committee meeting, and it came up in, I think, all of the stakeholder meetings, except potentially the one with the developer. I don't think he was overly concerned with the shock of new development, but it is these are concerns we're hearing a lot, and it's on both sides. You have a good amount of the citizens in Belmont that are unhappy with their perceptions of current development. They don't think that outcomes are meeting with the development expectations, and there's the shock. But there's also on the other side of the coin, the reality that City of Belmont presents unique challenges. I believe Steve was the one mentioned to me several times how premium land has already been developed, so the land that remains to develop presents challenges, to say the least. And also property rights, individual property rights are strong in Belmont. And worked with Shelley, and she put together this community engagement survey. And I think that as of earlier today, it had 121 responses. So it is not a scientific survey, but I did try and craft the questions to be as neutral as possible. I tried not to do any leading questions. By nature of the survey, there will be some, we couldn't control whether, I guess elementary school students maybe, or middle school students were replying, or whether, so there's that. But aside from that, 121 responses is a great response, and their responses bear out everything that we've heard. These are the highlights here. So 97.5% identified trees are important to me, and that breaks down about 70-something% as really like very important, and then 20% as yes, they're important. So, and then 98.4% of respondents agree trees provide important benefits. There's 79% support for protection and planting regulation, and almost unanimous support the city should enhance regulation on properties under development. What I found interesting, and I included that graphic, is that 68% of respondents were not sure that Belmont have an ordinance regulating tree protection and planting. And, if I'm just hazarding a guess out there, I could say that part of that might be because of the shock of development. When you see that, you might just think, well, they're not regulating anything when that happens. So, but that's conjecture, but that's just my hunch on that one. But the point is that what we're hearing from the steering committee and the city and in our stakeholder meetings held true when we put out the community engagement survey. I think I might have put, it might be out of order, excuse me. Well, we'll just go with it. So what did we find ourselves when we were going through this research and review period? So the current ordinance, in terms of both how it's written, the language used, the vernacular, and as well as the formatting, are not easy to interpret or understand. And I guess I think the first page of the ordinance, the general provisions, it's 11.3 maybe. So the first page of the tree protection standpoint is a good example of what I'm talking about in terms of the language. There's about 5 paragraphs there, of which none of them contain an actual provision. They're all suggested guidelines and sort of talking about the benefit of trees. And as the community survey also had a question about this, is pretty much everyone agrees that trees are important. I think 1 out of 121 people on the survey said that trees are not important and don't provide benefits, something along those lines. But for the most part, that's commonly accepted now. And so for ordinances, there's the statement of intent, which we included, but after that, I'm trying to avoid, I wouldn't call it flowery language, but it would be maybe, I don't know about superfluous either, but there's more words than necessary. So when you're dealing with ordinances, I wanted to be as clear and concise and direct to the point as possible. And so we found that was not the case here. And so when you look at the draft ordinance, and you'll see it changed the formatting around, so it reads much more like code. You can pretty much like reference any little bit, and you can take it to very tiny bits and pieces, and you'll be able to reference it specifically using the new formatting. We also found that the ordinance itself had minimal tree preservation if it was a residential district with greater than 3 dwelling units per acre, and essentially 0 tree preservation for commercial zoning. We also found the environmental surveys as required. I think section 16.5 lists the requirements of the environmental surveys. And so they include a slope analysis. It includes a survey showing the location of freestanding open-grown trees. But those requirements weren't explicitly listed in Chapter 11, and possibly as such, we didn't find evidence of the environmental surveys as submitted reflecting slope analysis or reflecting tree inventories, even if it's just inventories of freestanding open trees. So that seemed to that was an area that required attention. And one of the biggest takeaways from our field visits was the tree save areas that were being selected were generally smaller, lower quality trees. So, which then creates a problem both from a standpoint of, looking at something and enjoying what you're looking at, but also a problem from the standpoint of these trees could be potentially hazardous. In particular, there were lots of interior pine trees, which were tall and skinny and been shielded from the wind, that are now exposed to the wind. And these are susceptible to wind throw. And so when you have tree save areas with trees susceptible to uprooting in high winds in the backyards, right behind backyards of residents, that could also lead to issues. And then if you're not saving the higher quality trees, then you're also not maximizing the benefits that trees provide, the ecosystem services in terms of cleaning the air, and also of particular importance for Belmont is managing potential stormwater runoff. So those are the, I guess, big picture of takeaways. There were a lot of takeaways, but that frames it pretty well. And so then these are actually the goals that we came up with, I think, in our first steering committee meeting. And what was nice is that they also turned out to be accurate goals. We identified the right goals from the beginning, and our research showed that those goals were necessary. And then also the interviews that we did and the survey sort of kind of provided, I guess, a mandate almost to enhance existing regulation in order to protect, preserve, and proliferate canopy coverage. Clarify ordinance language for compliance. So we did find that it seemed like there were projects that did not do what ordinance said they should have done. And part of that is Belmont's had so much growth. I think that there's high volume, of demand on the planning board, but primarily I think that the code is difficult to read. There are definitions in Chapter 2 that there's multiple definitions in Chapter 2 that conflict with each other. I think specimen tree is actually defined twice with two different definitions just in Chapter 2. And then we also have, I think, specimen tree in the existing Chapter 11 that's defined differently than the two definitions of Chapter 2. And that's just an example of some things that are a little bit confusing. So that was a big focus of ours, to just make it much more clear what people should do. And then once again, achieve the balance between competing needs and interests. So we recognize both the environmental standpoint of things and the development standpoint of things. And the object is for me, it was to try and craft an ordinance that could be easy to understand and also universally applied. And then within the ordinance, provide the city with the tools necessary to, I guess, make case-by-case decisions where it warrants. So well, kind of hopping right into the comparison there. So let's start with the current ordinance. And I think today it might be, I'm going to probably spend the majority of the time on the tree protection aspect of things, because I think that that's where a lot of the meat of the changes have occurred. And I also think that it's where there might be some aspects might be difficult to understand. And hopefully this context will make it easier for you. So one feedback that we got the first round of comments from the city was a little bit of concern over whether or not the draft actually enhanced protections. And so the current ordinance requires 25% of mature deciduous canopy for residential districts with a DUA. That should say less than 3, I believe. Sorry about that. I'm just double checking right here. Yes, okay, so that was a typo on my part.
That's correct, it's less than. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah, so, but 25% of mature deciduous canopy. And then actually in 1133H, it says 25% of heritage trees. So on the surface, that sounds good, but the way that the ordinance reads, there's no real definition of mature canopy, right? So, and there's no guidance on how to quantify that or how to show that. And so from an area, if you're looking at aerial imagery, you can get a rough estimate of canopy coverage. You can also get a rough estimate of deciduous canopy coverage, but you cannot get a rough estimate of what is mature versus immature deciduous canopy coverage. And also, mature is not defined with any sort of DBH requirement within the current ordinance. So lack of clarity there makes it difficult to follow and enforce. And also it conflicts with the 25% of heritage trees, because heritage tree, as defined by the chapter 11 of the current ordinance, is a tree over 12 inches, but it doesn't specify between deciduous or non-deciduous. So it just says any tree that is 12 inches in diameter or larger measured at 4.5 feet above grade. So what we have between the two of them is you're supposed to save 25% of mature deciduous canopy, and you're also required to save 25% of heritage trees on the property. So you could end up maybe with more than 25% canopy coverage, but there I was unable to find a project that had done a full site-wide tree inventory, which would be required in order to apply that. So, and there is, and the environmental survey in section 16.5, chapter 16.5, requires a survey of open grown field specimen trees with a DBH of 12 or higher. But even if that, if developers were submitting that still wouldn't be enough information to properly apply that provision. So then we have, if it's residential and DO is greater than 3 in 11.33D, there are a couple of provisions for saving trees, and that's where we get into the saving the mature healthy deciduous trees in preserved and conserved areas, and then the NCR infill and the center commercial are only preserved and are only healthy deciduous trees in preserved areas. Now, I did not find any evidence that this was being followed, and I think the reason for that, which was pointed out to me back in the stakeholder interviews when I had an opportunity to chat with Nick for a few minutes is that the introduction to section 11.3, the general provisions of the tree protection, goes to great lengths to talk about, how significant vegetation on the site is a function of a site's buildable area or potential for development, and it segments things into prime buildable, second buildable, conserved, preserved. Well, a couple of things with that. One would be that those slopes might be somewhat arbitrary in that slopes of 15 to 25 or even over the 25% don't necessarily aren't in development impediments to, like, those can be overcome. But more significantly is there's no requirement in Chapter 11 that there needs to be a slope analysis, even though that's required on the environmental survey. And so you have to do a slope analysis and you would have to do a tree inventory in order to enforce anything having to do with these preserved and conserved areas. And even then, I'm not sure if you'd be able to enforce them because it is not presented as a shall or a must. It is presented as a suggestion. It is written as a suggestion. So there's a suggestion to preserve trees in these areas, and then tucked away, there's like a couple sentences requiring preservation, but I think it would be very easy to overlook that as a developer. And the current ordinance also, in my opinion, focuses heavily on canopy coverage, and there's not in there the focus on quality. And retaining quality trees is how you both improve the perception of development, because people look and they see healthier looking, bigger, better trees. And it's also how you maximize the benefits, the ecosystem services that trees provide to the community. So, my takeaway from the tree preservation, tree protection requirements of the current ordinance were that you can't know how to protect what you don't know that you have, I guess. And so without the tree inventory, it was sort of kind of just like shooting in the dark as to what we're going to protect. It's, okay, we know that portion of the site is wooded, so, that's some canopy cover. Then we'll save that, and it could turn out to just be, I guess, some scraggly trees, to use a scientifically correct term. So that's a very rough presentation of the major requirements of the tree preservation, of the requirements of the current ordinance. So when I was thinking about how to incorporate everything that Belmont has, and by everything Belmont has, I'm going back to all the different competing interests as well as the unique development needs. And it seemed to me that the best way to serve the interests of all parties would be to shift the focus of the ordinance from canopy coverage to tree quality in a way that does not sacrifice canopy coverage, but also does not overly encumber future development. So the way that I envision doing this is through a universal requirement for all zoning districts of 15% of the net lot area, which is loosely the gross site. It's defined within the draft in the definition section, but it is the gross site area primarily minus the existing and dedicated road right-of-ways. And so then a developer would be required, whether at this point, regardless of the type of development, the developer would be required to devote 15% of the net lot area to tree save. And so And then also another major requirements are the tree inventory of all specimen and landmark trees. We've changed the definitions of specimen and landmark trees. So specimen tree is essentially the exact same thing as what the current ordinance calls a heritage tree. I just wanted to use a different name because traditionally the word heritage tree, at least in arboriculture circles, kind of refers to like historic, special, unique trees. I used to take care of a tree in Chapel Hill that was planted in 1860, right? An oak. So that's just kind of nomenclature. What really matters is how it's defined. So I'm not tied to any specific names here, but I just thought that, let's rename the specimen tree. And then the landmark tree is a tree of, I guess you could say, higher value than another tree, primarily because of its size, condition, and age. So tree benefits accrue, they grow over time. As the tree grows larger, you get more benefits. So larger trees provide more benefits. Therefore, there should be, in my opinion, some sort of, we want to incentivize, if we're focusing on quality, we want to incentivize saving large trees that are worth saving, meaning healthy, et cetera. So, and those are 24-inch trees right now and larger. And so essentially the requirement of the current ordinance, the tree save would be you would need to do an inventory of the entire site and you're inventorying specimen trees and landmark trees. So any tree 12 inches and up. And that's critical because the entire concept of the tree save that I've incorporated in this ordinance rests on what is already there. And so what the tree save concept that I have envisioned is one that's more kind of a tree credit, I guess. So when I say 15% of net lot area devoted to tree save, that does not mean that if it's a 100-acre lot, then and 100-acre net lot, then 15 acres must be devoted to tree save. That is not what that means. It means that you need 15 acres worth of qualifying tree save credit, right? So if that, so for instance, so we've provided throughout the draft some ways in which you can earn additional tree save credit by, for instance, saving a landmark tree. So if you're imagining having the site and you have a total tree save of X acres, it's kind of like a running total, and I don't think I'm explaining that very well, but I think maybe we'll move on to the case study because that will help me explain exactly what I'm trying to explain. So this is a property that I have worked on, and it's in Chatham County and near Jordan Lake. And so when I spoke with Shelley and her team a couple weeks ago, one of their concerns was because of we're 15%, it's less than 25. And so are we actually strengthening protections? And the best way to figure out whether or not how the ordinance works is to apply real life examples to it. There was not an example in Belmont that we found that would work well, and the reason is because we do require the tree inventory, but then I remembered that I had worked on this project, and so what we have is a tract of land, 76.8 acres, and it was going to be developed into 145 unit subdivision with the dwelling unit per acre of less than 1.89 to be exact. And so this is what their tree inventory looked like. And so they had 786 trees that would qualify as specimen trees under the definition in our draft ordinance. So 786 trees that are 12 inches and larger. Of these, 387 were pine and the remainder were deciduous trees. And if the legend here is basically all of the blue are the pines and the rest are the hardwoods. And you can see this tract was much more wooded than, like there's a significant amount of wooded area that does not have any specimen trees. So that would be what I would call immature canopy. So right here, this shows how that even if we were trying to identify, you know, the 25% of the mature deciduous canopy, we could accidentally save the areas that are not mature deciduous canopy. We need the inventory to know what's happening here. So this is the numbers. Putting it through the draft, when you'd have the site area, 76.61, and that's from the construction documents, this number here. I was not able to get in touch with the developer to get permission to use the construction documents in the presentation. So unfortunately, we don't get to look at that, but maybe he'll still get back to me within the next, however bit, and so I can add that in there. But if you take out the existing and dedicated road right-of-ways, then you're left with 66 acres. 15%, 9.894 acres of required tree save. And then doing it the other way, I used GIS to do a rough area measurement of the wooded area, and it was about 52 acres. And based on visual estimate, as well as the fact that 387 trees were pine and 399 were deciduous trees, I used 50% to proxy the amount of canopy coverage as mature deciduous, which, though, as we just saw, that's not necessarily true. And so that would give us 26 acres of mature deciduous canopy cover, and 25% of that works out to 6.5 acres of required tree save. So in this one singular case study, so you got to just take it for what it is, one case study, though we do see that there is actually a significant amount more of required tree save in the draft than in the existing ordinance. So this, whoops. So I guess now it's been 43 minutes according to my timer here. So I've been talking a lot and I'm sure some people are kind of confused. So why don't we pause here to see what sort of questions we have, because I want to make sure that we understand all the the key concepts, not trying to get down into the nitty gritty, the details, and not today. Today I want to make sure everyone understands, why DRG and Joe decided to make these changes, and because if you understand our intention, then that might change the way you read things. So I'm going to mute myself and we're going to see if anyone has any questions.
Well, I'll ask a question here. So, so looking at this example, this breakdown, so it's really coming down to how much of the site is really the mature deciduous, correct? So we use the example that you showed that had a lot of pine, which we do have a lot of pine in our area. Would it make a difference? I want to make sure I ask this correctly. So in this, we're about almost like 50-50 between pine trees and deciduous trees, correct? Which plays a role. But if
Correct.
we had a site that had a lot more deciduous trees than pine, we could be ultimately, it would take a lot,
Yes,
but
yes.
we could be getting less.
Yes. So, I mean, there is a scenario where you
Right.
might get less. I mean, if you have, if say your property is, yes, all right. So in this scenario, let's say that it was actually like 100 pine trees and
Right.
600 or something deciduous trees, then you've got 83-ish% of mature of deciduous canopy coverage. And so
Right.
then assuming it's all mature, then you would be preserving, 25% of that 83, so like 20%. So you would be looking at 20% of 76 acres, which would, work out to, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 15 acres. Yes.
Okay.
So there are scenarios where it could be more, but you run into the problem of not defining mature
Right.
and so, just getting, yes. So in this case, So I guess the
Okay.
short answer is yes, there will be some scenarios where you might get less. However, you should be getting higher quality with the draft ordinance regardless, because there's no inventory aspect of the current ordinance.
I agree.
And so there's no health evaluation aspect. So saving a bunch of unhealthy, immature canopy is, even if you save a lot more of it, it might not necessarily provide you more benefits than saving less healthier canopy. So, and then there might be the occasional scenario in the situation where the DUA less than 3, where you might get less, though I still don't believe so. I would just need more.
For over the density of 3. Yeah,
But
or commercial, that's true.
Yeah, commercial, you're not getting like anything,
Yeah,
so
correct.
so my feeling, which I would need more data to back up, would be that when it comes to the residential communities with a less than 3 DUA, that more often than not, this ordinance would enhances regulation and protection. And even in the cases where it might not give you more overall canopy coverage, it would still give you a higher quality of canopy coverage. And then I don't think it's even disputable that it is better that you're getting enhanced canopy protection and coverage in the commercial, since there isn't any as it stands. And I knew that there's just so much going into this. I knew that it would probably run long, so I didn't get into the different ways in which under the draft ordinance, the developer is able to, meet the tree save requirements. So I'm sensitive to developers, I'm sensitive to commercial development, and I know that every piece of land is valuable to them, every, I guess, foot of land. So I'm not trying to have them go from, 0% to 15%, like I want to make ways in which they can still, well, for both residential and commercial, we're trying to be flexible, I guess. A good ordinance has flexibility, and so part of the flexibility I've tried to build into this is different methods by which they can accumulate qualifying tree save, whether that be through on-site planting of new trees, or whether that be through off-site mitigation, which would be planting somewhere within the city limits or ETJ off-site at a property designated by the city. And they would have to put a tree planting plan together for that as well, but you can get tree save credit for that. And then also there's payment in lieu, which the new draft has a formula for, and there are not a lot of examples of people out there that with payment in lieu formulas. So the people that I've talked to, kind of roughly basing it on like the appraised value of the land, like a percentage of the value of the land. So maybe you want to count, you've got 1 acre of tree save that you cannot, you just can't make up that acre of tree save, or you want to, you know, develop that piece of land. So then you would pay into the tree fund, payment in lieu, the, you know, some percentage of the appraised value of an acre of land for whatever that land is valued at the time of the development plan approval, something along those lines.
Okay.
And that is, I have not done, and I tried to find information on average value, tax value of land in Belmont. You know, I looked at some records, but I did not find a good way to like try and exercise that provision. So that formula that you'll find there, just everyone keep in mind that that's a starting point.
Okay.
And it probably takes somebody better at numbers and more intimate knowledge of Belmont than me to start tweaking things. But the point would be that we understand that there's challenges to development, and also understand that trees provide, you know, benefits, important benefits to the community as a whole. So how can we, you know, development's important to the community, trees are important to the community. How can we still encourage and improve on both? And so that was the concept behind the payment in lieu, as well as the offsite mitigation factors.
Okay.
And there's another aspect that I'd like to touch on, and Nick mentioned it in the comment that he sent earlier, and it's something I had intended to bring up anyway, and it's basically, so tree save areas are to be meets and bounds areas. So, and then, so if you've got like a 2-acre tree save, like delineated, and then within that 2 acres, you have a bunch of, I don't know, like 30 or 50 or something specimen trees, then how you draw the tree save area, it's one area, and then you get credit for the trees that are in that area. So you can have, let's say, 1,000 square foot area, as I think Nick's example had 4 oak trees at 16 inches, and I think 803 square feet is the critical root zone for each of those oaks. So if the tree save area is a rectangle of 1,000 square feet, and all 4 oaks and their entire critical root zones can fit within that tree save area, then yes, the way the ordinance currently reads is you would get credit for 3,200 square feet of tree save, even though the area itself is 1,000 square feet. So if you can imagine, critical root zones can overlap. And this was intentional on my part to allow for overlapping, because it allows for clustering of like it allows for clustering and grouping of healthier trees while simultaneously not simultaneously incentivizing the developer to try and choose areas that are clusters of healthy qualifying stands of trees, because the developer knows that if I save this patch of forest that has 20, 15-inch trees that are all looking really good, then I'm going to get some, I'm going to maximize my tree save returns. So what is not currently in the ordinance, which I think does need to be in there, is a cap on how much. So, and I, again, do not have the data to be running scenarios. It would be nice if I could, but I don't have the data. My gut instinct would be cap that at like 50%, so in that scenario that Nick provided, 4 oak trees within that 1,000 square foot area, instead of 3,200 square feet, that would mean you get 1,500 square feet of credit. And the reason I wanted to focus tree save on critical root zone as opposed to just canopy coverage is that critical root zone is what allows the trees to thrive and survive. If you protect the critical root zone, then you have the best odds of protecting the tree long term. So we're saving. So what this tree save areas do is we select based on quality trees, larger, healthier trees, and we protect the critical root zones. So if more than 30% of a critical root zone does not lie within the delineated tree save area, then that tree cannot count towards tree save because not enough critical root zone will be protected during development in order to say that that tree will survive, and so you won't get credit for that tree. Let's say your tree is in the tree save area and 15% of that critical root zone is outside of the tree save area. You do not get credit for that 15% of critical root zone outside of the tree save area. You get credit for the critical root zone that is protected by the tree save areas. So shifting the focus from canopy coverage to quality of tree and making sure that we're selecting healthy trees and protecting them during development, I think that ultimately does more for canopy coverage than, just choosing, areas of land from, not at random, but just choosing patches of trees and saying we're going to save these trees without really thinking through, without knowing what those trees are or, what health they're in, or, thinking through what that will look like for the homeowner later, or the potential hazard that might present to the homeowner later, to leave them with an interior, tall, skinny tree susceptible to wind throw. So I guess when I said earlier that this was, I don't want to say novel, but I haven't seen a lot of tree save areas that are doing it like this. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? I know it took me quite a while to think through, so let's see. Well, I've got 58 minutes now. Does anybody have any additional questions? I can go a few minutes longer if anyone wants to chat about a couple things. Otherwise, what I will plan on doing is seeing if I can put together a few more explanatory things to add to the PowerPoint, and then I will get that over to Shelley, and then Shelley can distribute that. So then you'll have it as a reference guide as you read through the draft and make your comments.
That would be great. I've had a couple people who had to drop off ask if they could have the PowerPoint. And then, Joe, if it's okay, if while they're going through it, they have questions that they need clarification on before completing their draft by the 17th, is it okay if I get them, compile them, and once a week send you something if there's questions that they have in the meantime?
Yeah, that's not a problem at all. That would be good.
And then I'll send it to the whole team so people can see what questions have been asked, because there might be someone else with the same question, and then they'll all see the answer. So.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I am here to help. I want everyone to I personally, I'm excited about the ordinance, but so I would like to get everybody on board there with me. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And also, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a planner, so there might be some things in there in terms of terminology or process that require redress, and I'm definitely happy for you to point all of those things out. And then again, there's going to be areas of the ordinance that just might require tweaking with the intimate knowledge of somebody that lives and works within Belmont. So specific areas of that should be considered. Like I know infill residential is an area that is going to get some scrutiny. So stuff like that would be helpful for me. What happened? Did I just lose connection? I'm not hearing anybody.
No, I heard you. I think everybody's just soaking it in. So, so what I'll share is if you guys, again, through your first couple reviews, if you have some questions that you want answered right away to help you continue your review, please send them in to me, and then I will make sure we get answers from the consulting team and then distribute them to everyone. Our goal is to have everybody complete the review by the 17th into me. I'll compile everything and get it to our consulting team, and then we'll work with them to address some of the updates and coordinate additional meetings to discuss it as warranted. And then please, while you're taking the time to review this document, please track your time for me so I can turn it into the grant people at the state. We are on the downside of this process, and it will be moving pretty quickly, so we want to make sure we stay on schedule. I did put in a time extension to the end of September to ensure that we hit all of our components of public outreach and then allow for adoption and modification and review. So please track your time. That will help me greatly.
Joe, this is Sharon. I do have a lot of questions that I'll funnel through to Shelley, so I didn't want to take up the time here, but just I did read through it briefly, and when you were speaking, you were just saying that this is universally applied, and when I read it, I couldn't really tell, is this really specific for developers and commercial? I mean, if somebody was building a new house, you know, single family residential, they wouldn't have to follow this watered down version of this. Is that correct, or would they? I just couldn't tell that explicitly on the first read.
So that's a good catch, and yes, so technically this does apply to all development. However, if there is a section, I think it's I've got my presentation still up, so the draft on my computer, but it's the modification section, I think at 11.2.5 maybe, if I remember correctly. There's a few bullet points in there, and essentially what I'm trying to do is I want to cast a wide net and then empower the planning board and the planning director to use discretion. So as of right now, yes, if say you own a vacant property in town, or you want to tear down a house and build a new house, then yes, this would apply as it stands now. And that was intentional because I would rather have it apply to everybody and then come up with, try and come up with an easy process for people to show that they can be exempt, as opposed to just outright exempt somebody. And then maybe, you know, for instance, maybe that vacant lot's got 35, 30-inch oak trees. You know, I would rather protect the trees and allow, you know, I guess that's sort of an outlier example that I just brought up, but I find it better to protect the trees and then come up with an easy process for a homeowner to say, oh, hey, you know, I've got this going on. Can I get an exemption from this requirement? And then the planning director can refer that to the Environmental Sustainability Board for a non-binding recommendation. And then the planning director can approve the exemption or relief or not. And then if this individual does not like the decision, then I guess they can always go through their processes as outlined in Chapter 18 to do an official appeal with the Board of Adjustment and everything.
That's correct.
Okay, so it sounds like the degree of deciphering the ordinance may be different. You know, if you're talking if a developer's reading it, they have some context, they would understand it greater than some single family residential person who's wanting to build a house. So we would have to maybe just how we present it would have to be made simpler for a homeowner, because a lot of the responsibility would be on them to go, have their surveyor, identify the trees.
Correct.
Yeah, so, okay, so it just would be a change in how we deliver the message, but you do want the message to be universal. Okay, thank you.
Right, right. Oh, no, and that's a very good point. So not just a change in how we do our messaging in terms of, future presentations to the council or the public, but also if you have ideas, and I'll think of try and think of it as well, a better way to word it or write it, or maybe add in another section. I mean, it's all very much in the works, but yes, what I'm envisioning is the ordinance applies to everyone, but then in the ordinance, try and see if there's some simple way to create a process for these, individual landowners, so it doesn't become an encumbrance on them.
Right.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Is everyone still there? Hello?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, all right. So if there aren't any more questions, the meeting may be cutting off here very quickly. So if you have any questions like that initially that you want to send ahead, please send them in to me. I'll compile them and get them up to our consultants, and then get the answers out to the entire team. And so I guess that's it for me, unless Joe, you have anything else to share, or?
No, thank you so
Anyone
much,
else?
everyone. I hope everybody's head doesn't hurt too bad after that presentation. And don't be afraid. I'm not afraid of criticism. So I look forward to your constructive criticism, and I look forward to working with y'all to, tighten this up even further.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. I think it's a good start. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.